Hello, and welcome to Sustainability Marketing, Lecture 2, Framing Sustainability Marketing, where we'll be looking at the external context. In terms of this lecture, in this first episode, we'll be looking at the external context for sustainability marketing, and in the next episode, we'll be looking at corporate social responsibility, or CSR, as the internal context for sustainability marketing. And then the third episode will be an interview looking at some of the concepts we'll be talking about in the first two episodes. In terms of learning outcomes, the first outcome is to become familiar with the notion of the dominant social paradigm, or DSP, as a context of and a constraint for sustainability marketing. We'll also be looking to understand the antecedents and key components of sustainability marketing, and finally appreciate how notions of sustainability might vary within different cultures and societies around the world, and the implications that has for sustainability marketing. For the structure of this episode, first we'll talk about marketing in its social context. Then we'll look at some of the antecedents of sustainability marketing. We'll have a look at the elements that make up sustainability marketing, and finally try and put sustainability marketing back into its global context. So first of all, thinking about marketing within the world in which it exists. In terms of the model you can see there on the slide, we have marketing, the activities of a firm within its world. And the perspective we've taken in the book is very much to think of it from the firm's perspective. So we're thinking of the firm and the way in which it seeks to build relationships with its customers, to provide value to them, to provide goods and services to them, and to have some kind of productive relationship with them. Having said that, you can't really understand that relationship without putting it in the context of the other relationships that a firm will have with its rivals, for example, because you will be seeking to meet customers' needs better than those rivals. In terms of the firm's suppliers, who will provide a lot of the value on which the products and services that a company develops will be based, but who also will embody many of the environmental impacts that a company will inherit when it delivers its particular goods and services to its customers. It also includes intermediaries. Many producers only reach their customers through, for example, retailers, who have a very important role in maintaining those relationships with those customers. So you can't really, although we think of marketing as almost a magic triangle relationship of the company with its customers against its competitors, you have to think about it more broadly in terms of the market within which those companies and those customers and those rivals exist, but also in terms of the wider society that a particular market operates within, and the influence of governments, of interest groups, investors who will have a very strong impact on what companies are able to do, for example, the communities within which particular firms operate, and the general public and how they feel about and respond to things that companies do and the markets and forms of production and consumption that develop. So we need to think about what marketing means within that wider social context. And it goes beyond just those players in the marketing environment. And that's something that Frank will take you through in more detail in Chapter 6. But just to think about the type of society within which we exist, it has its culture, it has its technologies, it has its political systems, it will have its economic systems and state of economic health. And all those different elements of society that combine to influence companies and markets and consumers, and the way in which they think and the way in which they respond to issues are often discussed in terms of a notion of a dominant social paradigm. In other words, a dominant social worldview, a way of thinking about things, about thinking about society, about thinking about the economy, about thinking about business, in terms of thinking about how we should live and consume and operate businesses. And many of those elements of the dominant social paradigm we tend to take for granted. If we look within consumer economies, a lot of the elements of the dominant social paradigm we live within are things like believing in economic growth, that economic growth is good and is important and is what governments and companies should aspire towards. We tend to have great faith in scientific evidence that decisions by companies, by governments should be based on good, sound scientific evidence, that the problems that we have can be solved by technology very often, that we have a great deal of trust in technology within our society today. We tend to have a strong belief in markets and that the operation of free markets is the most appropriate and the most effective way of distributing scarce resources, for example. We also tend to naturally have an anthropocentric view of the world, that we believe that people are important and that to a large extent the environment exists to serve the needs of people in terms of whether it's food, whether it's drink, whether it's shelter, whether it's leisure activities. We tend to see the environment as something that's there for our use as people. We also tend to have a very here and now social paradigm, that we tend to think of the current people, current generation of consumers and citizens and investors and workers are the ones who really matter. The generations that are to come, okay, yes, they count, but in some ways they're secondary to the needs of the people of today. So we tend to have a current-orientated paradigm rather than a sort of future-orientated paradigm. So the dominant social paradigm that we live within is almost very difficult for us to appreciate. We've grown up with it. It's always been there around us, and we take very much the elements of it for granted as consumers and as citizens and as managers. The dominant social paradigm can change over time. If you go back 200 years, you would have found a different social paradigm. You would have found more trust in God to serve our solutions rather than to solve our problems, rather than trust in technology, for example. So it does change and evolve over time, but at any particular time, it represents a constraint on what is possible within society, what is possible within businesses. And many people have argued, authors like Dunlop and Van Leer back in 1978 were arguing that without a change in the fundamental paradigm that we think about and think of the world using, we won't really be able to make substantive steps towards sustainability. So yes, sustainability marketing is about firms at the center of our model there, doing things differently, relating to their customers differently. Yes, it's about customers changing their behavior and learning to live and consume differently, but it's also much more profoundly about a change in society as a whole, that we won't necessarily achieve sustainability just by particular companies and particular customers changing what they do, changing how they produce and consume. That will depend upon much wider changes within our society that will reflect changes to our culture, changes to our political system, changes to our economic goals, changes to our laws, changes to what we see as normal and acceptable and desirable. And I think what you will see over time is a gradual change whereby sustainability marketing makes a certain amount of progress, reaches some form of limit until the dominant social paradigm itself shifts and evolves, and then sustainability marketing can come forward again. So in terms of the progress that individual companies can make, it will always be limited. It will be limited by what their customers are ready for, what their investors are willing to take a risk on, what their suppliers and their intermediaries can deal with, and what society as a whole thinks is normal and acceptable. And those things will only change gradually over time. So just because a company can't deliver sustainability perfectly today in what it produces and what it sells and how it produces its products rather, and how it runs its company, doesn't mean it doesn't have the ambition to be sustainable. It can sometimes mean that the society within which it exists is not yet quite ready for a totally sustainable company. In terms of how things have evolved over time in relation to marketing, we can see a gradually evolving and increasing external focus in the perspective of marketing itself. And if you go back to the production era of marketing that we looked at in Lecture 1 as part of the evolution of marketing, that at the time of the production era, the goals of organizations were typically very internally focused, very much on generating a profit, very much on hitting production schedules and targets to make that profit. Marketing existed as a means to help sell those products that were manufactured, but it wasn't really very much in terms of an external orientation in the goal set of the company. If we move more towards the marketing era, and where a consumer orientation was adopted by companies, increasingly consumer goals became the driving force behind business, that we began to look externally to the customer in terms of their wants and needs, and that what we produced became subordinate to the customer's needs. The customer's needs and goals of customer satisfaction began to drive corporate strategy. So so corporate strategy, marketing strategy became more externally focused, but only as far as the customer. I think over time, over recent decades, what we've seen is a growing sense of concern about the impact that marketing has in terms of consumption, in terms of production, and much more concern about societal goals, about well-being, both for consumers and communities and society more widely, about things like health, and about things like environmental protection. And as those societal goals have become more important to businesses as a whole, they've become more important to marketers, we've seen really a development of marketing strategies that reflect all three of those sets of goals. So to some extent, companies still need to be internally focused. They need to be focused on meeting the requirements of shareholders. They need to be focused on production in terms of quantity and quality and the way in which things are produced. But they also need to be externally focused in terms of the consumer and meeting their goals in terms of consumer needs, consumer wants, and building value relationships with those consumers, but also looking more widely at society, the expectations of society, and the sort of setting societal goals for the company and for its marketing strategy. And over time, what's developed is the notions of two types of views of marketing, micro-marketing and macro-marketing. And it's rather analogous to economics, where you have microeconomics considering the operation of a particular business, and macroeconomics concerning the operation of an economy at a more aggregate level. Well, it's similar for marketing. We have micro-marketing, which is concerned with what the company does in terms of trying to meet its goals of satisfying consumer needs. And we also have macro-marketing, looking more at the collective impact of all that production and consumption. So what impact does consumption and production as a whole have on society? What impact does the whole discipline of marketing and the whole body of marketing activity have in terms of society? So it's not just what are the impacts of one company advertising in a particular way. If all companies advertise in a particular way, which perhaps appeals to acquisitiveness in children or perhaps provides stereotypical images of women, what impact does that have on society as a whole? Sustainability marketing is interesting because it really straddles micro-marketing and macro-marketing. Most of the time within the book, when we're talking about sustainability marketing, it will be at the micro-marketing level. So it will be thinking about individual companies and how do they develop products and services and solutions for customers to generate customer satisfaction and to make a profit. So most of the time we're talking about sustainability marketing as micro-marketing. Other times though, and particularly towards the end of the book and the end of this lecture course in chapter 12 and lecture 12, we'll be thinking about the broader societal implications of marketing and the role that marketing can play in changing society. And in chapter 11 and lecture 11, Frank will be looking at how marketing can play a part really in social transformations that maybe can help to move society and move the dominant social paradigm towards a situation in which sustainability strategies become more feasible for companies to develop and implement. We can actually trace various antecedents to sustainability marketing as we talk about it. It's not the first attempt to talk about marketing in relation to broader society or the physical environment. And over time, various different ones have arisen. Perhaps the longest standing is the concept of societal marketing, which really says that marketers should take account of the societal implications of the goods and services that they market and the way in which they produce. So it very much tends to think about the impacts of consumption, whether overconsumption, for example, is leading to unsustainable resource use. And it also tends to pit the rights of the consumer to consume against the rights of the citizen as a member of society to be free from those consequences of consumption. And that can cause some quite interesting debates. Is it right that if people consume products like cigarettes, or they overindulge in food, or they drink too much alcohol, that makes them ill in a way that perhaps society has to pick up the bill, either for hospital treatment for the consequences of smoking or the consequences of antisocial behaviour from people drinking too much. And it's a very interesting dynamic within the whole debate about marketing, is to what extent do we balance those consumer freedoms of the individual to consume as they want against the rights of the citizen to be protected from and not have to pay for the consequences of those consumers' activity. A second attempt by marketing to think about some of the sort of broader and social elements of consequences of marketing in particular comes through social marketing. And societal marketing and social marketing are very often confused, even by people who know a great deal about marketing. I think the important thing to think is societal marketing is about conventional commercial marketing and its social impacts and environmental impacts and how those can be managed. Social marketing is about using marketing techniques to try and tackle particular social goals and social problems. It's been very extensively used in the field of health, where it's an attempt to use the philosophies, the tools, techniques of commercial marketing, the type of things we'll be talking about in the further chapters and the further lectures, to try and address problems like smoking, overeating, lack of exercise, but also other things like encouraging people to inoculate their children against diseases, to wear seatbelts when they drive, maybe to tackle a whole range of issues to do with health and well-being. And social marketing is something that's usually practiced not by commercial organisations, but by governments and public sector organisations and NGOs working in the field initially of health, but increasingly social marketing strategies have been adopted for environmental issues as well. So we now see considerable efforts being made to use social marketing approaches to help consumers adopt more sustainable lifestyles. And that's something we'll explore more in Lecture 12. Another form of marketing which tackled the environmental consequences of commerce in particular was ecological marketing. And ecological marketing arose in the 1970s. It arose at a time when there was a sudden awakening of concern about the environmental impacts of society and economies and the way we lived our lives, partly because of publications like the Limits to Growth report that came out in 1971 that gave people a very strong sense of natural resources being finite. I'm sorry, I think that should have been 1972. I'll correct myself there on that date. A very finite set of resources that people have available to them on the planet, and that if we continued with current patterns of production and consumption and resource exploitation, that some of those resources would start to run out as we moved particularly into the 21st century, it forecast at the time. But that sensitized people at the time to the idea that the way in which we were producing and consuming was potentially not sustainable. But it was particularly focused on certain industries. So the oil industry, for example, the car industry and the chemicals industry were very much a key focus for attention at that time. And the emphasis on ecological marketing was really trying to stop or to reduce the worst elements of environmental damage from production and consumption. And it was limited really to a relatively small number of industries. It did at the time, though, lead to some new types of businesses that were very much founded on environmental and social principles being inspired to be founded. So that was the sort of time you saw things like Anita Roddick founding The Body Shop, or Ben & Jerry's starting their ice cream operation as really very alternative types of business, really as a counter-reaction to some of these concerns about environmental damage that became very obvious in the 1970s. What we might call green or environmental marketing evolved from that in the 1980s. Really, at that time, it began to see marketing of environmentally improved goods and services, partly as an opportunity, driven not so much by concern about environmental problems, but by consumer interest in new, greener, and more sustainable products and technologies. And it involved a much wider range of industries. So we started to see not just cars and oil and chemicals, but many food and drink companies, clothing companies, household goods companies, and even service industries like financial services, travel and tourism industry, for example, starting to see consumers were interested in these issues and that there were opportunities to develop offerings to them to meet those particular needs. And it was very much seen as a positive development for marketing, very much about win-win solutions, that you could develop new products and services that concerned consumers would potentially pay more for. So it was potentially a profitable exercise for companies. In some cases, what they discovered, those companies who got involved in green and environmental marketing at that time was that some of those benefits in terms of serving those consumers' needs were difficult themselves to sustain, that sometimes consumer concern didn't necessarily translate into consumer purchasing of the level companies were expecting, and some companies found their environmental strategies difficult to maintain at that time. I think what we've seen in the last few years is an evolution towards a more thorough approach to marketing in relation to social and environmental issues, which was sustainable marketing that tries to think much more holistically about social and environmental issues, and also to think about the societal problems that face citizens, communities and industries, as well as the consumer-based opportunities that might be out there. And so it's a much more balanced, I think, and thorough and forward-looking approach to combining sustainability and marketing. We've used the phrase sustainability marketing rather than sustainable marketing because sustainable tends to imply a relatively definite end point where you say that something is sustainable. And in many cases, due to the constraints we face in the dominant social paradigm at the moment, it is very difficult to produce and market a sustainable product of any form in terms of being able to say, yes, that is 100% sustainable. It's very difficult. I think what companies can do is make the products and services that they offer and the way in which they produce and market them considerably more sustainable. So it's sustainability marketing in terms of making progress towards sustainability rather than necessarily saying it is marketing of goods and services that are sustainable, because unfortunately we haven't quite reached that point yet in the evolution of sustainability marketing. In terms of what sustainability marketing involves, it's slightly different to conventional marketing in that conventional marketing tends to take consumer behaviour, so consumers, their nature, their wants and needs, very much as the starting point, and everything flows from that. Sustainability marketing, we balance those consumer behaviour-based wants and needs with those socio-ecological problems to which consumers' wants and needs and consumption habits and lifestyles are connected. And so it treats those as an equal starting point for the marketing thinking process. So we don't just think about what does the consumer want and eventually think about socio-ecological issues as a potential constraint. We think from the very beginning about what are the socio-ecological issues that intersect with what our consumers want in terms of goods and services and lifestyles and how to consume, and how do we develop a strategy that can balance those. From there, the steps are relatively conventional in terms of setting values and objectives for our sustainability marketing strategy, coming up with specific sustainability marketing strategies to tackle the wants and needs of our consumers and develop solutions to deliver to them, creating a sustainability marketing mix, as in managing the variables that the marketer has at their control in order to develop an offering for the consumer. But then finally, and perhaps more controversially for marketing, we don't just seek to deliver a marketing mix to the consumer, we also looked for sustainability marketing to play a part in transformation, in terms of social transformation and transformation in terms of the way products are consumed, produced, and in the way in which people live their lives, and also hopefully to help to transform the dominant social paradigm to move it towards a new paradigm that's more sustainability orientated, in which more sustainability orientated ways of doing business become feasible. Just to say a little bit about the sustainability marketing mix, the elements of which will form the basis of 4 of the later lectures in this course. The conventional mix is the 4 Ps of product, price, place relating to distribution issues, and promotion. For this book and for these lectures, we suggest for sustainability marketing not 4 Ps, but instead 4 Cs of customer solutions, customer cost, convenience, and communication. And the reason why we pick those variables instead of the conventional 4 Ps is that really the 4 Ps are very product and production orientated. They very much take things from the company's point of view. So it's the product that the company produces. It's the price that they decide to charge for it to offer to consumers. It's the places through which they distribute and market their product. It's the way in which they promote their product to the customer. And promotion really is a very unidirectional way of thinking about marketing communication. It's about promoting our product to the consumer. So it's a very product and producer orientated way of thinking about marketing. Our 4 C's, by contrast, are very much more customer orientated. So we talk about customer solutions. In what way does what the company offer represent a solution for the customer, to their problems, to their wants and their needs? Instead of thinking about price, we think about customer cost. So not what is the money that the company requires for the good or service that they're offering, but what does it cost the customer? Not necessarily just in money, but also maybe in time, maybe in effort, maybe in terms of the psychic costs of giving up a way of consuming or a brand you've been familiar with for many years to adopt something new. So again, it's a much more customer-orientated way of looking at things. Again, convenience is much more a customer-orientated perspective, because really customers don't care how the product gets to them. It's just a question of the product reaching them in ways that is convenient, at the right place, at the right time, in ways and means that don't cost too much effort on the part of the customer. So convenience really is what the process of getting customer solutions to consumers is all about. And then finally, communication, because communication implies a two-way process of interaction. It implies not just promoting a product to a consumer, but actually developing some sort of dialogue with the consumer so that you understand them and can build a relationship with them. So as we say, it's a slightly different way of thinking about the marketing mix, but we think it's actually a more customer-orientated way, and in that way, actually more within the spirit of marketing. And the final theme for this framing of sustainability marketing is to say that we've tried in the book to take a global perspective. We've tried to look at different countries and different regions and explore how and why sustainability marketing may be slightly different across different countries, because different countries have different social problems, ecological problems. They have different cultures. They have different traditions in respect of production and consumption of different types of goods. They will have different lifestyles. So it's very difficult to come up with a single approach to sustainability marketing that is equally applicable to any of the countries that you can see on the map over there. So it's important to understand that, as well as the dominant social paradigm of society generally being significant in terms of sustainability marketing, how you can practice it, how you can approach it, that the local culture and society within individual countries will require marketers to think very carefully about what type of sustainability marketing would be right for particular countries. And this was explored quite interestingly in a report entitled Sustainability in a Multipolar World, which looked at several different countries in the world that had very contrasting social and economic and political systems to see, well, how would the process of promoting sustainability-orientated goods and services, and even promoting sustainability as a concept and sustainability-orientated education, perhaps be very different in those different types of society. And although it's a long and complex report to go through, I'll just provide a couple of examples of the way in which they show the conception of sustainability in particular countries is not the one that you may be familiar with from your own country. So in the middle of the picture there, we have the standard view of sustainability marketing, of sustainable development, I should say, which we looked at in lecture 1, of the intersection and the balancing between economic issues, social and political issues, and environmental issues. And it's that triple bottom line model, is bringing together of those three elements, that's very much the most common approach to sustainable development that we tend to see discussed, for example, within European countries. And yet if you look in other areas of the world, it's seen really very differently. In Russia, they have a much more of a concern, for example, about security, and they see sustainable development as being part of a process of creating a more secure society. And that can be in things like resource security and food security, as well as political security. But for them, it makes much more sense to think of it as a security issue. In China, the environment tends to exist really as a bridge between the economic and the socio-political, and the way in which environmental resources can be used to both meet economic goals and help address economic goals, while also dealing with socio-political issues. Whereas in South Africa, for example, it's seen more as being an important issue in terms of governance, that Environmental resources are extremely significant in South Africa. It's a very resource-rich economy. Much of its economy depends very directly upon the natural resources. So they understand perhaps this more nested version of viewing the economy and society within the context of the environment, and then within that, the importance of appropriate governance to make sure those resources on which the economy depends are sustained and managed in ways that allows the economy to survive and develop in the future. So it's really just to put across the idea that you can't take for granted that sustainability marketing will mean the same thing and will face the same constraints and the same priorities in every country around the world. But there are many principles and elements of it that are in common between different countries and regions. And within the book and within these lectures, we've tried to pick out those elements which we feel are relatively universal about sustainability marketing. So in terms of reviewing the issues that we've just talked about, in terms of review and discussion questions, you might like to think about why societal goals might be more difficult for marketers to set and define than consumer-orientated goals. You might want to discuss how sustainability marketing is perhaps different to some of those antecedents that it has of societal marketing and social marketing, for just two examples. And then also to think about that there are these different conceptions of sustainability across the world in different countries, and what the implications of that might be for sustainability marketers really trying to develop solutions for the customers within their own countries. In terms of references, Chapter 2 in our book it covers most of the issues that I've been talking about within this lecture, and so I recommend that you review that. I would also recommend one of my own pieces, the article Towards Sustainability, the Third Age of Green Marketing, published in Marketing Review, which really does trace the evolution of marketing across these different eras in which it's tried to address sustainability issues at different levels. And then finally, the report I mentioned, Sustainability in a Multipolar World, published by the Hague Centre for Strategic Studies and TNO, and available online, which I'd very much recommend that you read. So, thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.